The president's record speaks for itself, and the allies and the non-NATO friends and partners that are coming as well, they know that. They wouldn't be coming to a NATO summit if they didn't believe in American leadership and how important it is, and if they didn't believe that President Biden takes that responsibility extremely seriously.
The White House assuring the public of President Biden's fitness to lead ahead of a NATO summit in Washington this week to celebrate the alliance's 75th anniversary. The president is hosting world leaders for the 3-day summit as he faces calls to bow out of the presidential race following the shaky debate performance and growing skepticism of his ability to beat Donald Trump. Biden is adamant, however, he is staying in the race. Joining us now, former Air Force Assistant Vice Chief of Staff and News Nation national security contributor, General Richard Newton. Thank you for being with us. The message to the American public is, I'm staying in the race, I'm able to lead. He'll carry that same message to world leaders. I am able to continue this job now and for the next 4 years. How pivotal is this meeting for the president on the global stage?
Very pivotal, not only for the president, but certainly for U.S. national security, Marnie. You know, with the domestic aspects of the debate performance and where we are today in terms of how he's viewed by the American public is one thing, but also on this international stage, this most important international stage that kicks off here in a few hours with the 75th NATO summit. How he's viewed from the NATO members, the leaders, but also from the international body. It's very important that we have a successful summit. It's important that the president delivers on multiple fronts here. It's a grueling Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. I've been part of these summits before. It's taxing on not only the leaders, but the staff. But all eyes are on the president of the United States this week.
There's no doubt, General, that this will overshadow a lot of the other discussion is the president's ability to lead on the global stage. But aside from that, what are the greatest priorities of NATO now 75 years in?
Well, first and foremost, the number one priority is Ukraine. Marty, you and I have talked about this for months. The fact that the war is now in a war of attrition, it's a stalemate, particularly in the eastern part of Ukraine. Up to this point, Ukraine has been somewhat effective with the great support of the United States and the NATO allies in terms of defending. But nonetheless, as we see right here, the Russians just on Monday, on the eve of the summit, conducted 40 missile strikes against 5 civilian cities. And also, we reported earlier that it actually attacked a children's hospital. By the way, that is a war crime by Putin and Russia. But nonetheless, the top priority is to make sure that Ukraine not only just defends itself, but in my view, is victorious in defeating Russia and compel the Russian forces to get back on the other side of their border, point one. Secondly, the other important factor of this summit is to provide a pathway or a bridge that would allow Ukraine at some point to be invited into NATO. That's important. The third most important piece, which really surrounds the whole summit, is to show the strength of the United States-led NATO members, all now 32, the unity, as well as that message to the rest of the world that they're going to stand behind Ukraine. NATO is going to continue to be unified and to, again, make sure that the peace is maintained. And frankly, Russia is put back, as I mentioned, back on its borders. We cannot accept Russia or capitulate to Putin that he can attack Ukraine and take territory away from Ukraine.
How effective is NATO as a whole in not only supporting Ukraine, but deterring Putin from his continued action there and potentially elsewhere?
Well, so far, NATO's been very effective in deterring. Obviously, it wasn't effective back in February of 22 when Putin, again, made the largest land invasion since World War II. But since then, what he's done is he's really, I believe, emboldened NATO, has shown that NATO can be unified against a principal aggressor, in this case, Putin. That message, Marnie, is not just important to Putin and Russia, but it's also important to other adversaries that face the West, particularly the United States. I'm speaking in terms of China, certainly Russia, Iran, North Korea, what is now, I would characterize as a new Cold War against the United States and NATO partners and allies and other partners and friends throughout the world. That would include Australia, Japan, South Korea. By the way, they're also attending this summit as well. So all eyes are on Washington, D.C. as this kicks off. But it's absolutely important that NATO remains strong, continues to be strong, continues to provide weapons and capabilities to Ukraine. So again, not only can they defend their territory, but they can compel Russia to leave their territory. So very critical at this point.
We know Great Britain going through leadership changes within its government right now. Who are America's strongest allies within NATO?
Well, certainly Great Britain is. Prime Minister Keir Starmer is the new prime minister. By the way, President Biden will meet with him on a bilateral discussion for the first time, I believe, on Thursday. He'll also be meeting with President Zelensky. But what comes to mind immediately is certainly Great Britain, France, Germany, others who have not only maintained a decades of support to NATO and certainly a free Europe, but has also raised their gross domestic, the percentage of their GDP, their gross domestic national product that goes towards defense. The threshold for NATO is 2%. Now, as in this 75th anniversary, 23 of the 32 members have now met that threshold. That's significant. Only a couple years or so ago, there were only 9 member nations that have provided that 2% threshold. Now there's 23. The United States, by the way, we put 3.5% of our GDP towards defense. Russia, on the other hand, they put 6%. So again, a united NATO, one that puts their money where their mouth is in terms of support of not only NATO but of Ukraine. This unified message is so very important, but also the actual spending of dollars in support. My final point here is I believe what's going to come out of this NATO summit and the communique on Thursday will be a pledge of $40 billion annually from NATO on an annual basis just for military aid alone towards Ukraine. That's important.
Real quickly on that point, I mean, one of the concerns from critics of former President Trump is his ambiguity on NATO and America's continued role in it because of some of the spending. Is there a scenario in your mind where you could envision the United States not being part of NATO, and what would be the consequence of that?
I don't envision that from a historical standpoint or a practical standpoint. As if I were advising the Trump administration, I would advocate for a very strong collective defense alliances, not only in NATO, but throughout the world, because the global nature, the national security picture for the United States and our national security objectives has evolved and changed, even as we speak right now, to what I believe is you can't just go it alone as a superpower anymore. These collective defenses are ultimately very important, not because just the nature of the collective defenses themselves, but also they really strongly support U.S. national security objectives overseas, not just militarily, but diplomatically, information, economic, and finance, and so forth. So I would advise the Trump administration to again, continue to support these alliances. I would continue to support the momentum going forward with a successful NATO alliance, certainly over the last couple of years. But I would also compel the next administration, whoever that is, to continue to keep putting the pressure on Putin and Russia, because the only thing he understands, Marnie, is strength. And strength comes from a collective defense, and strength comes from a unified NATO.
This week is critical. General Richard Newton, always learn something in our discussions. Thanks as always.
Good morning, Marnie.